Hello, people of the internet. I am Jen. I would like to talk a little bit about my experience with Aspergers and mental illness. This is basically the first of what may be many or maybe just one video, depending on how this goes. I don't typically like speaking, but I'm trying to view this as a conversation that is one-on-one so that I'm a little bit less nervous. Um, Basically, I have not actually received a formal diagnosis for Asperger's. I need a specialist who works with neurological stuff, so a neurologist. And my health coverage is such that that's just not an affordable option right now, so I'm on a waiting list and will hopefully get a diagnosis in a few years. I'm 25. I figured this out not that long ago, like within the last month or so. My sense of time tends to be a little bit unreliable. But yeah, I've had some time to kind of think about it, and it just sort of shocked me when I had my kind of aha moment, because I tend to think of myself as having done a lot of work and put a lot of effort into understanding why I do specific things. So having that degree of self-awareness and realizing that, wow, I can still be surprised, was very humbling. But also the biggest relief I could possibly have imagined. I want to stress that the diagnosis to me is very positive because it explains just all of these little unexplainable events that have been occurring my entire life, with just the way I express myself and communicate, and I make social errors. I misunderstand, or I take things literally, and it takes me a while to figure out. I'm so distracted during social situations that I can't pick up on sarcasm right away because I'm already processing so many parts of my environment that I can barely attend to the conversation. When there is a house full of hungry people, I tend to need to flee because all of their collective restless, hungry, cranky energy just drives me crazy. I feel like a frayed nerve. I'm gonna just say right now that this is probably gonna be the most disorganized video. Like, the content might not make very linear sense, but my brain is such that I'm doing my best. I'm trying very hard to not lose my train of thought, and yeah, they're right there. Not, yeah, get derailed. So yeah, I have been basically in some kind of therapy from a very early age. I, as a child, was extremely anxious. Basically, I was sort of viewed as like a sensitive kid. Like, I don't know if any of you have had labels like that put on you, or if that's how you would describe people with more specific needs. I think a lot of the time it was misconstrued as being an overreaction to things, and to me it was probably an underreaction because I perceived that people didn't want to listen to my complaints. I tried very hard at a very young age to please people and get them to like me. I had a very hard time with peers. I was very easy to manipulate because I wanted friends so badly, and I realized that I was not connecting with people neurotypically. I say neurotypically as a word for people with normal cognitive function or response. So I don't like to use the word normal, but it has a function here. Um, um, So I was talking about being an anxious kid. So I don't know, I was always viewed as the problem because people didn't understand what I was reacting to. Like, there were many misunderstandings where I just didn't understand the implications of things that I was being probably tricked into doing. I don't really remember. Part of my issue is that I have a really faulty memory, and I had a lot of very traumatic years, and so I kind of have like snippets of it that are very accessible, and then there's other things that I've kind of been bringing up more lately as I'm trying to connect all of this within my life and just understand. I find a lot of comfort in understanding something. So with my anxiety, my parents were really worried, I think, about my, I don't know, just lack of friends, or like good friends. Like, they recognized that most of my friends were actually severely bullying me. I didn't really understand that, or I was willing to be bullied because I genuinely believed there was something wrong with me. So I thought it was deserved. So I started getting symptoms like I'd get tingling in the palms of my hands and sometimes even my feet. And I went for all these tests, and people the doctors were trying to find a physiological cause, but it was all like physical manifestations of my anxiety. And so my anxiety was also viewed as a symptom, but really with Asperger's, one of the defining features is anxiety, because the person doesn't feel like they can handle the social situation. It's why little surprises and stuff can be really, really difficult for someone with Asperger's. Okay, so all the testing sort of led to, I wound up seeing a child psychologist eventually because I think it was felt that I needed help relaxing. Like, it was starting to affect my sleep. I've always had a really hard time with sleep because I'm typically, at nighttime, my brain almost goes into overdrive because the quiet of my external stimuli allows my brain to sort of focus more attentively on other things that maybe I actually want to attend to versus things I feel like I wind up being aware of just because I'm too aware or just really sensitized. So even with seeing child psychologist, it was missed, and I think, like, I do remember things like eye contact being commented on, and I think part of what happened was I was so sensitive to criticism, and I still am sensitive to criticism, but I'm way better. But at the time, I was trying so hard all the time. Like, I was never not trying, but people would very frequently accuse me of not trying. They wouldn't actually figure out that my intent was really good. I just didn't have skills that other people seem to naturally have, where they can read social interaction and body language and like intent from little signals that I just don't see. And so I was also a very naive kid. Like, I was ridiculously trusting, even though I was being abused. Like, I didn't understand what was happening. I got really confused, and people would disorient me socially, and it was just really difficult for me to express to anybody what was happening. Like, they'd ask me what was happening, and I couldn't explain it in a way that the adults felt like they could do something. So I was being taught how to relax. Like, I had guided visualizations and stuff like that, and that helped me for a while, but my stress wound up being really high, and so when I was 8, like, I started having kind of really panicky symptoms, and by the time I was 11, I was having like full-blown panic attacks in public. So what would happen some of the time would be I'd be out, usually I think with my mom, just because I think she took care of me more then. And we do things like maybe go to the grocery store. I still have a really hard time with grocery stores, and I'll explain that. I'll make a note to explain it. Groceries. Oh yeah, so started having panic attacks. And I remember my mom being really distressed by not being able to comfort me. And you need to understand that she would try to do very, I think, very human things like comfort me with touch, and depending on my stimuli, I would be like I'd have like a physical response that was really negative. So I'd flinch, or maybe almost act like repulsed. And I think that was really hard because, like, you have to understand, no one understood why I was sensitive. Like, no, it wasn't understood at the time. I was indulged to a point, but at a certain point too, it was kind of, they tried to use tough love, and not understanding that that was probably the worst thing they could have done, just because I responded very well to kindness and patience, because I realized that I was frustrating people, and that frustrated me, and I was frustrated trying to express why I was frustrated. And I remember my mom telling me, I don't actually really remember this super specifically, but she told me when I was 11, I told her that I didn't want to exist anymore. And it's something that I've actually heard can be quite common with people with Asperger's, where it's not that you're actually suicidal or you want to kill yourself or even like hurt yourself, really. It's just that you're so tired, and your brain has like, it's like your thoughts get so much momentum that it would almost present as like a mania in me. And so I got misdiagnosed a lot with things like bipolar. I'll talk about that more in a bit too. Where, yeah, like I'd have extreme mood changes, and it was really confusing. And then I'd also have like really disjointed, vague symptoms, like having images that would kind of go with my anxiety, which was later apparently PTSD. But I also have this feeling that, I know people with Asperger's, they think in pictures. That's like the description I've heard. That's probably not true for every single Aspie out there, but sorry about that. I should have turned off my phone. Alright, so talking about thinking in images and being nonverbal, you've probably heard this term used a lot, and I'm still kind of figuring out what it means, honestly, so bear with me. Maybe this will make sense, maybe it won't. But I will emphasize that it is just basically my perception of it. I kind of view it, in my case, you started using language very early on. Like, I always sort of had this really pretentious fascination with language. And I tended to like the rhythm that I heard in it. Like, I was really fascinated by poetry and symbolism, and like how meaning could be shown in different ways. And I think I really felt fascinated by how vastly language could capture so many states, that I think I was trying so hard to find a way to express them. And so when I started reading, it kind of opened up this whole world where suddenly I could have all these adventures without actually having to go through the pain that would be associated with the stimuli. So even just like, even things that weren't, that I would have, that I did enjoy, where I'd be maybe playing with my cousins over the weekend, like I would just get so exhausted not having my own space to go to, and I would exhibit all of these kind of like antisocial behaviors, but be perfectly content in them. But coming, yeah, back to basically, like, now I have a relatively, I think, unique use of vocabulary, and I think when I get to use it creatively, I really enjoy creative writing, and it's one of the main ways I kind of work through a lot of my issues now. And so I get to really play with language and figure out what I can use to show different parts of an experience, because I think there's just so many parts, because to me, any experience I have, I'm experiencing in so many sensory ways that the impression it will leave on me can really be quite severe, even as it can be problematic because I'm very easily overwhelmed. But I also find that a lot of the ways that I try to explain my view or explain concepts tend to not make sense to neurotypicals. I have a lot of friends now who are on the spectrum, and I seem to have an easier time communicating with them. Maybe it's even as simple as I believe I'm going to have an easier time communicating with them, so it then is easier. But I really believe there's kind of a logical consistency in the way that people who present on the who have Asperger's, sort of orient towards other people. I feel that we're all very deeply empathetic people, and that gets really confused too, because we can seem to have an incorrect response, like laughter when something's serious, or just sort of like minimal things that kind of are associated with immaturity, but really it's just a confusion of signals, I think. And it's very genuine, but it's not meant the way I find I've been often perceived. When I just sort of get really nervous, maybe, and will giggle when I'm being yelled at because I can't. It's so horrible, and I am in such a state of apology and trying to explain that whatever the assumed intent was, it really wasn't there, and just trying to convince the person, because I hate feeling misunderstood. I think every single person in the world probably hates feeling misunderstood. And communication is very important, like in a very consistent way in our lives. And when we're not aware of all of the nuances of it, it's really difficult to navigate these situations and have people still get a decent sense of who we are, even us get a sense of who we are, I think. And it took me a very long time to figure out that I really was sort of copying other people, and I really didn't know who I was. And then I started thinking about who I wanted to be, and this went more with sort of other things in my life, but I just decided that it was sort of within my power, and I get really stubborn about things. And kind of the second somebody tells me I can't do something, I'm just kind of like, no, I'm going to do this. And so it kind of worked out in a lot of ways. It made me very resilient. So with all this stuff, I started running into issues with depression, and like I was, diagnosed with depression also when I was 11. And when I think after I turned 14, I started seeing a psychiatrist and receiving medication. And within this time frame, I got diagnosed with bipolar, I got diagnosed with ADD and ADHD. I wound up with OCD-like tendencies, where if I was super anxious about something, I'd start compulsively organizing. Not cleaning, organizing. It's an important distinction here. I have a very hard time taking care of myself when I get obsessive about stuff, which is basically very consistently, like on a daily basis, I tend to get obsessive about any of the things I enjoy. And I try very hard to moderate how much energy I'm using. I find I'm constantly at a loss with my energy, and I think that's probably also true for most people with Asperger's, autism spectrum disorder. I also have struggled sometimes in social situations when I'm trying to talk. I'll run into issues where I'll get like muscular throat spasms, where it like stops me from speaking, and I almost sound like a teenage boy going through puberty, because it comes out like a squawk and I can't quite control it, and it's like a stress response. I'm slowly working on it and getting past it. I'm also challenging stage fright. I like singing, but I am terrified of doing it in front of people, so slowly working on that one too. And then there was this really interesting period during, I think it was during middle school, so I would have been 12 or 13 at this point. I definitely have issues with picking. Like I know definitely a common symptom, but not always, where there's picking or hair pulling, like the word for the hair pulling is trichotilliosis, which I don't do that one, but I've done things where I'll pull out like individual hairs, and as I'm doing it, I'm really not aware of the long-term consequences of these things. So like I pulled out all my eyelashes and had to go to school like that, and you can imagine how horribly I was bullied. And the problem was I had no idea why I had done this, and I was just as horrified when I realized what I had done. And so my mom's freaking out, and I think wound up happening with my eyebrows too, so we were getting like things to try and like draw stuff on me because I just couldn't seem to leave it alone. I think my parents were really worried. I mean, that's a really worrying thing for your child to do, but it was just so impossible to understand what it might be about. And so it was obviously about anxiety, but it was very hard to figure out more specifically what was happening to cause such an intensity of anxiety. So I've also had issues really consistently with IBS, another very common complaint, basically just gastrointestinal issues. It's super embarrassing. It's a problem when you have places you need to be. It's really tricky. One of the other things that happens for me, and I think this is also exacerbated by medications that I'm taking, but in social situations, if I don't really know someone very well yet, but I still have a vested interest in the conversation and like getting to know them, I tend to have a very like stress response where I start perspiring like intensely and I turn bright red. And it's just so embarrassing. And sometimes my glasses will even fog up and I'll get like beads of sweat pouring off of me. And I can feel it happening. Like I can feel every single teeny tiny detail associated with this. And I can feel the other person noticing it and like not knowing what to think and being really confused. And I just get so overwhelmed by my like embarrassment and humiliation in that moment that sometimes I get selective mutism where I stop being able to speak at all. And it's really impossible to make a lasting good impression when you have so many weird, just little things. So I'm suddenly realizing how long this video is. So I'm going to try and keep it more succinct for the rest of this and just get through this quickly. So more recently, I basically, with a lot of my mental health stuff, like I was for years seeing psychiatrists and getting all these different diagnoses, and none of them were really helping me, and the medications were always really problematic. I seemed to be really sensitive to most medications, frequently prescribed for anxiety and depression, but it was severe enough that they were very persistent in wanting me to be on medication. So I wound up on like a just crazy cocktail of different things to try and control little things, and I think there were just so many contradicting messages happening in my body that's already, like my nervous system's already sensitized, like I respond more to light and sound and all those sort of things, so it's a very disorienting experience and it's very difficult to convey to people what that's like and what's happening. I tend to use expressive language that just really sometimes, like it makes perfect sense to me, but I'm always describing like an abstract feeling, which isn't really helpful for other people, and so it's just like weird little communication things. So eventually, with one of my psychiatrists, I had been doing some research and really believed that I might have post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what PTSD stands for. And so I think most people associate this with violent trauma, or I think with war veterans. But basically, you can get it from any kind of trauma, like emotional abuse, anything like that. And I think partly with my sensitivity to these things, I think I was more predisposed for like a negative trauma response. So I had a really hard time working through all of the associated emotions and like expressing what I was feeling. And I think also since like there's flashbacks associated with that where you'll remember something, And sometimes you'll relive a really horrible event, so like it'll feel like it's happening all over again. And since my nervous system is so sensitive, my whole body goes into fight or flight, and my body, like, I know logically I'm safe, but my body thinks that I'm in like mortal peril. And it's just exhausting because I just have to wait for it to pass, and it's just really difficult to function well when I'm still having a hard time controlling that. So basically what I'm working on right now is healing a lot of that trauma and like letting it go, and I think I'm having more success with it now because I understand where it's coming from, and I'm actually able, this is so great because I feel like I can finally express it somehow and hopefully make sense. And so not too long ago, one of my partners, I practice polyamory, which is a relationship dynamic where you have multiple like meaningful relationships. It's can be a kind of weird concept to a lot of people, and I think it surprises people because I'm supposed to be like emotionally stunted or something, but it's more that I am a very dynamic person at this point with all of the different personas I've been drawing on for like my own inspiration, and just figuring out who I want to be and am. And I find polyamory to be vastly less stressful than monogamy. Like, I've always kind of not liked dating because it feels like all this pressure to be like everything to this one person, and it's always seemed like a really unrealistic expectation. Anyway, that's getting a little bit off topic. One of the other things I wanted to mention was just issues I've had with like eating disorders, where it's not like the sort of typical presentation where women are kind of like, I don't know, there's like this idea where women are shamed into doing it because of body image stuff, and I definitely had extremely low self-esteem and body confidence, but I think it actually had more to do with just feeling like I had absolutely no control of anything, not even how I was being perceived. Like, I had no control over what people were thinking, and I couldn't sway them and like just make that connection. And so it was just very frustrating and isolating. So like eating disorders presented more as like a response to my stress, where like I'd either feel a need to binge eat to maybe satisfy some other hunger or connection, whatever it might be. Maybe I was trying to fill sort of this void where I wasn't connecting with people, and then trying to, and just feeling really frustrated. So I wound up for a while sort of existing on just like coffee and Ensure. I don't know if you've heard. It's like a meal replacement drink where if I was having a really hard time with food, I would just drink those to try and still make sure I was like getting some nutrition, but I was also relatively reckless about it, and I still tend to have a hard time with the idea of consequences. It's not usually obvious to me how many things are being affected when I'm having a hard time. So, like, most of the time I function very well, though. Like, don't get me wrong. So yeah, that is the majority of the things I wanted to talk about with this stuff. With the PTSD, it's been really helpful in understanding that I may just be more sensitive, and that's okay. I'm like, again, I'm not using that word as a limiting label. It's just sort of to help other people maybe understand it. So it definitely has a function. And then with figuring out, I have Aspergers, right? That's where I was. I was talking about my partner. Sorry about that. See, sorry, ADD. Yeah, my partner actually just kind of came out and asked me if I was on the spectrum, and at the time I don't even know what I responded with, actually. I might have brushed it off, or I might have been like, maybe, but basically my brain went into overdrive with this idea, and later I was on the computer doing all this research, and yes, I definitely have been accused of hypochondria, and I would say that's probably a pretty common characteristic of a lot of people with Asperger's, because we like information, I think. I like information. It makes me more comfortable with my decisions. It makes me just better able to make one. I just need a lot of information to feel comfortable. I need more information than most people tend to. So I know earlier I mentioned that I would come back to things like grocery shopping and bipolar. So groceries, I find grocery stores to be the most overwhelming possible environment because you're having to make all of these decisions that require like long-term planning. And then I also tend to be hyper aware of other people, even if they're not doing this. Like, this could just be my own imagination sometimes. Yeah, like sometimes it's very accurate and sometimes it's just my imagination where I assign sort of characters to people, like especially when I was a little kid. Like, this isn't something I do now, but when I was a little kid, like we'd be out, and to try and cope with it, make it into something I could understand, I would often sort of make everything into a quest or an adventure in my head. But I was also really aware of other people's reactions to me, and I was always like just really sensitive to it. So if I perceived that I was being judged, like I felt a lot of when you're female and you have a really big appetite and you eat a lot of food, people have this tendency of commenting on it, and that sort of thing that wouldn't really be that big a deal probably for most other people really affected me. So I had like this whole guilt thing around food because I didn't think that as a woman I was supposed to get hungry, because I just interpreted all of these like cultural things really literally, and so I thought there was like some reason that women didn't eat or something. It was really, yeah. So I just got really confused and would typically learn, like, I'd learn a lesson from a lot of situations, but it wouldn't be the right lesson, if that makes sense. Like, I'd assign meaning to the wrong part of the experience and just, yeah, kind of get tangled up in the details. Okay, yeah, so groceries. So with that, and then I also find like there's so many choices. I find decisions really hard, like difficult, and I find there's also like this fluorescent lighting. There's all these sensory things like smell, like say, or like the meat section's really hard for me. I'm really sensitive to specific things, and I'm really weird with meat and like raw meat and specific things. Like I just have really intense responses sometimes, and there's a lot of like little things to navigate in grocery stores too, and even things like one like squeaky wheel on like my grocery cart. It's ridiculous. I know people don't get upset about stuff like that and function well. Like I understand all of that. It's just it's not that I want to be distracted by it. It's that I can't help but be distracted by it because I'm just really aware of the details. So it can just be tricky. So I mean, I have a hard time. I don't like going grocery shopping, but usually when I do, it's like the best thing ever because any act of self-care I provide for myself, I find tends to be very rewarding because, especially for so long with having it be such a struggle, it's been really great lately. So yeah, so, and then also I mentioned bipolar. I think just with the severity, I'm not going to go into tons of detail because this could be like a huge thing. But I think just with the severity of my mood swings and I think the main kind of character traits and how it sort of how Asperger's presents in women being generally unknown and sort of not really, it's just not a very well-known thing, and there's so many variants, and it can be quite subtle, and I mean, if I'm going to go into this again, it should probably be like a whole new video. So I think I will sign off at this point, but thank you very much for bearing with me. I really have enjoyed this, which is really surprising me, so awesome. Yeah, thanks. Bye.